Gilgamesh was already nerfed, and I did not expect that. Ahoy, my name is SLOTH, and today we're going to talk about the Gilgamesh nerf that is going to happen before he even leaves PTS. If you remember my recent Gilgamesh balance video, I talked about how I thought he was probably slightly above the point of balance. We would initially not see that though, because he has a relatively high skill cap, so it would take a while for people to even get to that point where they fully utilize his kit. So I thought that his release state was actually decent. But Hyris has written quite a fair bit of text to explain why they think that's not the case. Gilgamesh had a great PTS cycle, with everyone getting a great opportunity to dropkick some enemies around. In general, he saw a lot of play and proved to be a strong contender for solo lane and jungling. He has certainly lived up to his name, getting a lot of attention for being potentially overtuned. By the way, I personally didn't hear too much about that. Like, sure, there were the typical titles saying, wow, he's so strong, he's broken, top tier, but those exist for almost every god. It's either completely broken or completely trash. That's just, YouTube for you. So I don't know where these voices came from, but well. We wanted to make some adjustments before he goes live to take some of that edge off. Specifically, two components of his kit stood out: his early level burst and early to mid level sustained damage. Many players fell prey to the level 2 Gilgamesh both in solo lane and the jungle, getting kicked into a wall and immediately dying. The displacement NCC is already strong enough, but the base damage made it too potent. Combined with his 100% uptime on Sunforge Scimitar, due to the ease of having a target to hit in solo lane, he was very difficult to fight. By increasing the mana cost and reducing the cap, some windows to fight back will open up. We are excited to see the King of Uruk make his way onto the battleground of the gods this Tuesday. See you all there. So the first part of the nerf is regarding his 1. That's his initial damaging circle ability with a slow and the steroid that follows afterwards, Sunforge Scimitar. Decreased maximum lifetime increase from 12 seconds to 7 seconds. And the wording here is actually a little bit confusing because it could be interpreted in two ways. That's because the ability has a base duration of 4 seconds. So it could either mean that the ability can now be 4 seconds plus 7 seconds extension, so 11 seconds, or that the ability can only be a maximum of 7 seconds. And the part mentioning the 12 seconds doesn't make this clearer because of how the ability is currently described, so it doesn't quite add up. We'll have to find out. I'm assuming it's likely going to mean that the ability has a maximum duration of 7 seconds, including the 4 base seconds, which would make it significantly shorter, which especially in early levels would be quite impactful because it has a 14 seconds cooldown on rank 1. I do, however, think that this part is a reasonable nerf since this ability is strong enough still. It is a very strong clearing tool with initial damage and the basic attack damage steroid after that, and the cooldown is short enough anyways. In addition to that, the mana cost is increased from 60 across all ranks to 60 to up to 80. I think this part is also reasonable because it is pretty worth maxing this ability at the moment since it allows you to clear so much quicker, especially in solo lane because it has such a short cooldown and it can hit the full wave. So I can see why they would kind of scale it down in terms of mana efficiency so it's more matching with other abilities that you would otherwise level. But there's a second nerf here, and this one is very confusing to me, and that's the Dropkick. The base damage of the Dropkick is decreased from 70 to 190 to now 60 to 180, so 10 off all ranks. That is the initial part of the kick. The part of the kick if you kick into a wave is unaffected, but the burst damage is also reduced. That is what happens when you kick an enemy into a wall. This damage was previously 70 to 250 and will now be 50 to 250. So specifically the early ranks are being targeted here. But if you look at these numbers overall, that means against a target that is kicked into a wall, the damage is reduced by 30 base damage on rank 1. A 30 base damage reduction is huge. For example, for Apollo, just a 10 base increase on an ability made a massive difference. But I want to give you a better point of reference than an ADC because I wanted to figure out how hard was this ability really hitting? Was this really a problem? And I looked at Bellona's 2 because Bellona's 2 is known as a heavy hitting ability that has two parts to it as well, where you have to hit the first part and then you have to hit the second part. It's definitely easier than Gilgamesh's ability, but still it is a similar concept. On rank 1, on PTS, Gilgamesh 2 did 70 damage in both parts of the ability for a total of 140 damage. After the nerf, it now deals 60 in the first instance and 50 in the second one for a total of 110 damage. So the ability's base damage was reduced by more than 20%. Bellona, on the other hand, deals 30 plus 70 damage with her hammer if she doesn't hit a guard with the first part, which is 100 damage. But obviously if you're targeting a guard, you're gonna hit that effect on them as well. So with the first part you'll still deal 30 damage, but the second part is amplified to 88 base damage. So you deal 118 damage in total. So you deal 8 more damage with Bellona's 2 by confirming it on a target than you deal with Gilgamesh 2 if you confirm it on a target and hit them into a wall. And by extension of that, Gilgamesh's ability also ends up at 430 base damage at max rank now, and Bellona's 2 against a guard ends up at 537 base damage. So across the board, Bellona will deal a fair bit more damage with her 2. And I don't think that's fair. I really don't think that is fair, especially because Bellona's 2 also scales down in cooldown from 14 to 10 seconds, while Gilgamesh 2 does not. I do understand that Gilgamesh 2 is a very powerful tool because it can displace an enemy. But I do think that landing it into a wall for this surprise burst damage that Hi-Rez is so concerned about is a relatively skillful thing. You need to be good with positioning, and the enemy is directly punished for mispositioning. The same way that you're punished for standing in your own wave if you're playing against a Bellona. Or the same way that you're punished when you let yourself get pushed through minions by Kuzenbo. I think it's not wrong to have these circumstances that you have to learn. You have to learn to play against specific guards, and, well, if they happen to have a strong early game, then you have to learn how to deal with that. An enraged Kukulin would get significantly higher damage numbers than a Gilgamesh elf. So I'm really not sure where this very heavy-handed nerf early is coming from, especially since this is such a core part of Gilgamesh's kit, and most of the time, again, you won't even see that burst damage unless you position very, very well, because often you will just kick enemies back into your team or you kick them into your ultimate, and in both cases the burst damage will not apply. But the base damage of the initial kick was nerfed across all ranks, so it'll always affect you. It kind of goes against what Hi-Rez has been doing lately, where they start off with a slightly stronger release and then just tone them down relatively quickly, and is more of a preemptive approach, which surprises me because this is something that Hi-Rez hasn't done in a while. I'm open to be positively surprised here, but I kind of thought that Gilgamesh needs this early game potential, high early game burst and being a threat in early game, since his late game is not necessarily the best because he doesn't have a passive and his abilities are relatively easy to counter. We'll see how this goes, and I'm very curious because I want to see how different he feels without high ping as well, but I am surprised by the decision that Hi-Rez made here. If you want to hear more about Gilgamesh once he comes out, click like and subscribe, or I will go to my